Dr. Phil Harris, and I want to talk about a topic that I think is often ignored in doctoral circles. And what that is what is scholarly writing? Well, I know when I was a doctoral student, nobody really came out and defined it. My mentor never defined it. I had a lot of professors. Nobody ever really said what it was. I had a good writing instructor in one of my residency classes, and she critiqued our work, and that was all well and good, but nobody really said, what is it? So what I want to do today is demystify scholarly writing. And what it's not is what we think it is. And what I mean by that is often we try to write to a scholarly audience, which means we've got to use technical jargon, difficult to understand words, and make it difficult to read, long sentences, all that kind of stuff. So what is scholarly writing then, if it's not to cater to scholars? Well, it's really to attract the widest audience for your work. That's what you're really after, is you want to capture the largest audience you can and convey your ideas. And if you're writing to an elite population that, they may not even be able to read it, and then everybody underneath that is not going to be able to read it, you're defeating the whole purpose of writing your dissertation. So, what is scholarly writing? Well, I came up with some ideas that I believe in. You start out with your gap in the literature. You're trying to discover something that's new to fill in a gap in the literature. And when you get this idea, it's kind of fuzzy or cloudy, and you haven't clearly articulated what it really is yet, but you've got to do some work on it. So it's going to be poorly written, incomplete, and then you're going to develop it. Okay, so which is the next stage, is development. And in that stage, you still have bad grammar, sentence structure is not that good, and you have problems with your style. And then you start to work on it, and you get into the real labor, nitty-gritty work on it, and you start to more clearly articulate what it is and support it and make it convincing. That's what scholarly writing is about. And so, what is scholarly writing? It's everything you hated in English class. And that includes things like using proper grammar, making your writing clear and concise, using transitions to go from paragraph to paragraph, from sentence to sentence, providing scholarly support, using good references and citations, and it should also have an introduction, body, and a conclusion. All things we learned about in our writing classes. So I've come up with a writing matrix, and you can see in the top corner in the blue, it says scholarly writing for dissertations, which is under normal and it's clear and concise. And what scholarly writing has to eventually wind up to be. When you start out, it's difficult to read, and it's all that stuff we talked about that's down in that lower box. And sometimes you might have things that you read that are informal, but they're clear and concise. I'm thinking of things like books or magazine articles. Those are pretty easy to read, and they're clear and concise, but they're more informal. Scholarly writing is more formal, so it's in that top blue box. And then if we come down to the gray area, where we have difficult to read and formal, you know what's in that? That's scholarly journal articles. And why do people have problems writing scholarly? Because we're trying to follow what everybody else does. And you know what? I think, we think too much of ourselves as scholars, and often we fall into the trap of writing like our peers. And honestly, scholars don't write all that good. And that's why a dissertation is special, because we get all of that stuff that you don't understand out of it. That's what a scholarly writing is for your dissertation. So keep that in mind, and we have to follow all the writing rules, just like we do in, writing a good paper, but we've got to do more than that. We've got to make it clear, concise, make people understand it, support it well, make it convincing. How do we do that? Well, we use active verbs. Avoid passives like the to be verb or was, were, or any combination of those followed by a participle like ing and ed. Use interesting verbs. Okay, and what I do is I like to go to Google and compile a list of all these verbs that I think are pretty interesting, and wherever I get a chance to use them, I throw them in my work, and it makes it sound better. Now sometimes the verbs that you pick out are going to not be so good, so you have to check yourself to make sure you're not going from better to worse. You want to bring it down a level. Always keep that in the back of your head. You want to keep your writing so that your audience understands what you're trying to say. When you write a proposal, it's got to be in future tense. Think about it. You're writing for what you're going to do, so you will do this. And then, when you get I or B approval on your proposal, you have to convert everything back to past and present tense, because by that time you've done it. So all those will verbs are going to be, become past and present tense. And by all means, check for plagiarism. There's nothing worse than something that's supposed to be scholarly and it's coming from God knows where. You're supposed to be a scholar, use scholarly sources, and paraphrase. You should only be using direct quotes sparingly. Only when the meaning of what you're trying to get across is lost if you try to paraphrase. That's the only time. You should have one idea for each paragraph. Connect your paragraphs with transitions, as I mentioned before. And here's something that's important. You should be using comparison and contrast. You've read all these wonderful articles, and what did you read about? How are they the same? How are they different? So you've got to compare and contrast when you write. And that lays a good backdrop for the work that you're going to do. You should also be synthesizing. Okay, now that you've got all this stuff, how do you combine it and use it to create new ideas of your own? That's what scholars are all about, creating knowledge. So if you can combine these things in new and creative ways and come up with your own theories, bingo, you're spot on. And avoid long sentences. Keep your sentences down to 35 words or less and vary their length. It's monotonous when all your sentences are the same length. If they were all 15 words, that'd be monotonous. So have some that are 35, have some that are 10, but vary your sentence length. And if you can't, break up those long sentences if they're over 35 words into smaller sentences. Now that might sound odd, but you can do it. There's ways of doing it. Check your punctuation. A lot of times you get a different meaning if you put the punctuation marks in a different place in your work. The idea is that a comma is a pause. So if you pause in the wrong spot, you're going to convey the wrong message, maybe from what you had intended. So check your commas. Read it out loud. You should also have proper paragraph headers. And I believe in a doctoral dissertation you're supposed to use all the APA levels. So what I'd suggest is you go to your APA manual, look at the format at the different levels, and make sure you use them. Check your references and citations. They all have to be right. And a common thing I find is that students forget you have to have a DOI or a URL for every journal article reference. So if you don't have those, go back and find them. You have to do that. Another common problem is a chapter in a book. Those are not like a normal book, so I'd suggest you review the rules so you know how that should look. It's a little bit different. And by all means, when you have any doubt at all, ask someone, because you don't want to guess. Talk to someone who knows the style. If you have grammar problems, you can consult the Gregg Reference Manual, which is a great resource for grammar. And as I started out to say, don't assume all articles are written in scholarly language. They're not. Scholars, frankly, are terrible writers. But you can improve, and you should learn to improve. And if you're having difficulty, by all means, hire an editor. You have to weigh the cost against your time, and your time costs money. I mean, if you take extra doctoral classes, it costs money. So if you spend $1,000 or whatever you're going to spend on an editor, it's well worth it, because it'll save time. It'll free you up to do other things that you need to do on your doctoral journey. Well, thanks for listening to me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again soon.